Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision,
Right.
like engineering.
Yeah, exactly. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points to the film.
Right. They just point and say, there it is. That's the problem.
It's totally binary, broken or not broken. I mean, you put a cast on it, and you have a very predictable timeline for healing.
But then you step into the world of modern family law or, neurodevelopment and the kind of psychological trauma that comes from having your entire life dismantled. And suddenly that x-ray machine is just useless.
Oh, completely useless. The machinery doesn't work for that.
Right. We're looking at a landscape that is incredibly murky, where the symptoms are treated like character flaws and the actual structural damage is just, well, completely ignored.
Yeah, swept under the rug.
Exactly. So today, we are opening up a source that claims to have built a brand new x-ray machine for a very specific, and I should say very controversial kind of institutional trauma.
It's a dense one today, for sure.
It really is. We are looking at a text designed specifically for a red-pilled men's rights activist audience. And it is a roadmap through what the author describes as the extraction engine of modern divorce.
And this text, I mean, it does not pull a single punch. It is dissecting the historical capture of legal institutions, tracing how we got here, and offering a deeply intensive psychological survival manual for men navigating this space.
Which means we have a massive journey ahead of us today. So right off the bat, do us a favor and like and subscribe to this channel so we can keep bringing you these incredibly deep dives into dense material.
Highly recommend doing that.
And a quick heads up for you listening. If you find yourself wanting to read the full text after we unpack this, and I strongly suspect you will, you should check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy it.
Yeah, that's where you can grab it.
Also, make sure you follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack. The book is called Nonconsensual Divorce, a rite of passage for men, personal alchemy, and meditation to manage moral shock, published by Conrad Riker in 2026.
Quite a title.
Just to set the tone, the cover art alone is a statement. It's a completely golden man sitting on a golden toilet, calmly reading a book.
Yeah, that image alone does a lot of heavy lifting. It's satirical, obviously, but it signals absolute defiance. It tells the reader that this is not, a polite clinical self-help book. It's an operating manual for surviving a crucible while maintaining your sovereignty.
Which brings us to our mission today. We are going to completely deconstruct Riker's framework. We're going to trace the legal history he lays out, understanding how these institutions functioned before he argues they were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
And then we are going to dive deep into the Jungian psychological alchemy he proposes for men who feel, entirely dismantled by the family court system.
It is an intense, philosophically dense roadmap. But before we get into the mechanisms of how this all works, we really have to lay down some very clear ground rules for this discussion.
We absolutely do. Because, look, this source material contains highly politically charged content regarding feminism, the administrative state, and modern gender dynamics. So we need a mandatory impartiality disclaimer here.
Right. We need to be crystal clear with you guys.
We are not taking sides here. Our job is to impartially report on the author's worldview and convey the ideas exactly as they are written in the source material without endorsing them.
Yeah, we are here to unpack this framework, examine the mechanics of his argument, and help you understand the exact architecture of this book. We are looking at the blueprint, not necessarily co-signing the billing.
Perfect way to put it.
All right, with that established, we have to start where the book starts, the foundation. Before we can understand the psychological survival tactics a man needs today, we have to look at the battlefield itself.
Yeah, the terrain.
Right. Riker insists that to survive the system, you must first understand the institutional history of how marriage shifted from a moral covenant to a purely financial contract. So where does he drop the pin on this timeline?
He drops the pins squarely on the year 1970 in California. This is when Governor Ronald Reagan signed the Family Law Act.
Okay, 1970.
And to understand the magnitude of this, you really have to look at the specific architect of this bill, an assemblyman named James Hayes.
Oh man, the irony of James Hayes championing this bill is just staggering when you look at his personal life.
It really is.
For those who don't know, he was a man who famously left his own wife to marry his secretary.
Which is, the perfect lens through which Riker views this legislation. Hayes championed a bill that effectively abolished the requirement of fault in divorce proceedings.
So no more proving someone did something wrong.
Exactly. If we rewind before 1970, marriage was legally recognized as a bilateral covenant. If a party wanted to dissolve that covenant, They had to prove a legally actionable breach of duty to a judge.
Meaning you had to bring evidence of something tangible, like abandonment, extreme cruelty, adultery.
Right, actual evidence.
You had to prove a moral failing or a broken promise.
You had to prove that the contract had been violated. But the 1970 legislation changed the fundamental nature of the institution overnight.
It was a massive paradigm shift.
It transformed marriage from a binding bilateral covenant into what Riker describes as a unilateral, voidable at-will arrangement.
Voidable at will, that's a huge phrase.
It is. The state essentially declared that the objective reality of a man's fidelity, his loyalty, and his historical provision no longer held any legal weight.
Wow.
A man could pour his entire life into building a household for 2 decades, remain completely loyal, and still find himself legally categorized as a redundant utility the exact moment his partner decided to file a petition.
Because the partner could just dissolve the contract without needing a reason, and the state would back that dissolution with its full legal authority.
Exactly.
The author describes this as the quiet moment the legislature rewrote the societal ledger. And obviously this didn't stay quarantined in California.
No, it became the blueprint for the entire country. Throughout the 80s and 90s, no-fault frameworks swept through the state legislatures.
Right, it was a domino effect.
But Riker points to the late 90s as the true acceleration point. In 1998, California overhauled its dissolution guidelines once again, but this time they took a massive step toward what we see today. They automated the formulas.
Wait, let's pause on that. Automated how?
Yeah,
Are we talking about stripping the human element out of it entirely and just plugging numbers into a spreadsheet?
that is the exact mechanism. They effectively replaced judicial discretion, meaning the ability of a judge to look at the unique texture, history, and context of a family with algorithmic statistical income preservation.
So a judge isn't really judging anymore.
Right. Riker argues this system was reverse engineered to protect the state's revenue stream and minimize bureaucratic drag.
Minimize the drag, right? Just push people through the system.
The system ensured that the higher earners' labor superseded the actual nuanced facts of why the marriage collapsed.
Which leads to one of the most provocative claims in the entire book. He calls this an administrative war on male provision.
That's a heavy accusation.
It is. He says the court completely stopped asking who destroyed the marriage. It just asked how to process the human wreckage through the chute as efficiently as possible. Human souls became line items on a municipal budget.
That is the core of his historical analysis. The state flattened the chaotic, agonizing reality of human betrayal into standardized, formulaic inputs.
Just data points.
According to Riker, the hidden, functioning premise of no-fault divorce is brutally simple. The higher earner becomes a debtor the exact millisecond the petition is filed. Instantly. The union is treated post-mortem as an insurance contract for the lower earner, and the higher earner is unilaterally designated as the lifetime premium payer.
But wait, if we are looking at this impartially, whenever you hear about family court from the outside, the phrase that is constantly repeated is, well, in the best interest of the child? That is the stated mandate of the court. How does Riker reconcile his theory of an extraction engine with the court's mandate to protect children?
He addresses this head-on by identifying that phrase as the ultimate Mott and Bailey fallacy.
Okay, break down the mechanics of that fallacy for us, because I think it's a brilliant way to understand how language is weaponized in these institutions.
Yeah, Mott and Bailey is a rhetorical strategy derived from medieval castle design. The Mott is the stone tower on the hill. It is a highly defensible, practically unassailable position.
So it's the safe ground.
Right.
Yeah.
In the context of family court, the Mott is child welfare. If someone says, hey, we must do what is in the best interest of the child, no reasonable person is going to argue against that.
No, of course not. It is an undeniable moral good.
Exactly.
You'd sound like a monster if you disagreed with it.
Yeah.
So that's the stone tower you retreat to when challenged. What is the Bailey?
The Bailey is the fertile but vulnerable land outside the tower. It represents the highly controversial, aggressive position that the institution is actually trying to advance, but which is difficult to defend on its own merits.
I see.
Riker argues that the Bailey in family court is the state's aggressive presumption that only the continuous financial provisioning of the father equals genuine welfare.
Wow. So they're conflating a father's presence with a father's wallet.
Yes.
By equating best interests strictly with financial preservation, the court reduces a child's flourishing to a monthly wire transfer.
That's the argument. It uses the unassailable concept of helping children to justify the permanent seizure and redistribution of male labor.
It's brilliant rhetoric, honestly. The phrase essentially shuts down debate, masking a profound ideological shift where children are viewed as revenue-generating dependents requiring state-managed sustenance.
Rather than heirs requiring a present father in their daily lives. And that reframing is what allows the bureaucratic processing to feel morally justified to the people operating the machinery.
Riker uses this incredible imagery to describe what this feels like for the individual man walking into this machinery. He talks about the docket number arriving like a cold branding iron.
That's a vivid image.
He paints this picture of a guy stepping into the courthouse wearing a tailored suit, carrying the immense psychological weight of a shared history, his children's faces, his entire identity as a protector.
He's a whole human being.
Exactly. He walks up to the glass, the clerk stamps a sheet of paper, and instantly, that man is transformed from a sovereign father into a municipal budget projection.
The individual is systematically processed, not morally judged, not heard, just processed.
Okay, I have to play out a scenario here, because if the system was truly automated in the 90s, just to preserve income and create bureaucratic efficiency, how did it become what Riker describes as an explicitly extractive machine?
That's a great question.
Right, because he says it actively feeds on conflict. But if it's just a spreadsheet running a mathematical formula, why does it need friction? A spreadsheet doesn't care if you're fighting.
That is a crucial distinction. A static spreadsheet can record a settlement, but it cannot explain the institutional appetite for ongoing friction.
So where does the friction come from?
Riker points out that while the outcome is mathematically predetermined, the process of getting there is deeply monetized.
Ah, the process.
The modern family court, in his view, does not adjudicate conflict. It harvests it. The system is structurally parasitic.
Parasitic how? Give me some examples.
Well, every motion filed, every subpoena issued, every mandatory mediation session, every court-appointed psychological evaluation, these all operate as toll booths.
So the dispute resolution service actively profits from the continuation and escalation of the dispute.
Exactly. The American divorce industry generates tens of billions of dollars annually. It runs on predictable friction.
Wow.
The procedural friction, the endless discovery demands, the financial affidavits, the court-ordered parenting classes, they essentially monetize male grief.
So the institution actually requires your domestic conflict to sustain its own fiscal apparatus. Without the fighting, the toll booths go bankrupt.
That is exactly his point.
So if the legal machinery is designed from the ground up for extraction, and the house always wins, we have to look at why men voluntarily walk into this meat grinder completely unprepared.
They do, constantly.
Why do they cooperate with their own dismantling? Which brings us to a massive psychological shift in the book, Riker's concept of the good boy contract.
This is fascinating. Before a man can effectively fight the system, he has to understand why his very nervous system is intrinsically wired to comply with it.
Right, it's deep programming.
Riker argues that men are conditioned from childhood to trade their objective truth for institutional and female approval.
He mentions corporate HR orientations, right? Like from the time you are a kid in a modern school system to the time you sit through your first corporate desk job orientation, you are taught that constant grinning compliance is the highest virtue.
Yes, sit still, be quiet, follow the rules.
You are taught that accommodation is strength.
He argues that men have internalized a cultural narrative that suppressing their natural spirited anger is a sign of moral superiority.
So they think they're being good men by not fighting back.
Exactly. When a man outsources his internal compass to the collective feelings of a bureaucracy, he signs the good boy contract.
He deeply believes that if he stays small, agrees to every absurdity, and acts reasonable, the system will eventually recognize his virtue and treat him fairly.
I imagine guys going into mediation thinking, well, if I just show them I'm the good guy here, if I don't raise my voice, if I offer more than I have to, the judge will see I'm honorable and protect me.
And Riker calls this the gamma trap.
The administrative state weaponizes a good man's inherent desire to be reasonable. The mechanism of the gamma trap is fascinating, honestly.
How does it work?
The bureaucracy relies on the man's decency to extract his resources without having to use physical force.
Let's use the author's concrete example to see how this actually plays out in a courtroom. There's a 2021 case he cites involving a prominent tech partner in San Francisco.
Yes, that case perfectly illustrates this.
Let's put ourselves in this guy's shoes. He sits down with his lawyers at the very beginning of the discovery phase. He is operating under the assumption that honesty and transparency will be rewarded with fair dealing.
As most guys do.
So he lays all his financial cards on the table immediately.
He provides years of flawless documentation. He doesn't hide assets. He wants to demonstrate good faith.
And what does the court do with that good faith? I'm guessing they don't give him a gold star for honesty?
Not at all. They interpret his early generosity not as fairness, but as an admission of the capacity to pay even more.
Wow.
The judge looked at his complete financial transparency and established a baseline standard of living for the marital estate based entirely on his single highest, most aberrant earning year.
You've got to be kidding me. So if he had one massive year where his stock options vested and he worked 90-hour weeks, they locked in that absolute peak anomaly as the permanent baseline for his support payments.
They permanently converted his 1 year of extreme excellence into an indefinite wage garnishment.
That is brutal.
As Riker puts it, the court did not punish him for failing his marriage. It taxed his excellence.
Because he showed them what he was capable of at his absolute maximum limit.
Right. The bureaucracy explicitly rewards the man who overgives by locking in his generosity as the new floor for maximum extraction.
So playing the good boy in family court is essentially like showing up to a heavily armed robbery with a handwritten apology note and a detailed map to your wall safe.
That's a great way to put it.
You think you're being noble, but you're just walking calmly into the processing plant.
Yes, you are volunteering for the slaughter.
But wait, let me push back on Riker's logic here. If a man realizes compliance is a trap, doesn't resisting the court just trigger contempt charges?
Oh, absolutely.
If compliance drains your bank account, but non-compliance triggers the physical wrath of the state, like frozen passports, suspended licenses, actual jail time. How does a man win if both paths are punished?
This is exactly the trap the system relies on, and Riker acknowledges the brutality of this paradox. Compliance generates the illusion of safety, but preference from the institution is not actual protection.
It's a fake safety net.
The system is ingeniously designed so that compliance is mathematically punishing over the long term, yet non-compliance is catastrophically enforced in the short term.
It creates a permanent state of low-grade siege for the man.
It's a complete lose-lose scenario.
So what happens to the psyche when the good boy realizes he's trapped?
That realization triggers what Riker calls moral shock. When a man realizes he cannot comply his way out, the old illusions shatter.
It must be devastating.
It is. He experiences a profound psychological whiplash when he understands that the institutions he trusted, the ones he paid taxes to and obeyed, have declared neutrality in his divorce.
And in a system that Riker describes as fundamentally captured by a specific ideology, declaring neutrality is just a polite bureaucratic euphemism for taking the accuser's side.
Exactly.
It's the moment the gavel hits and a guy realizes his story, his 20 years of being a protector, a provider, the guy who fixed the roof and paid the mortgage. It means absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
The state just remapped him into a financial node.
And this is where Riker diagnoses what he calls the epistemological rot at the center of the courtroom.
Epistemology, okay, that's the study of how we know it is true.
Right. He points out a glaring clash between objective evidence and the postmodern lived experience fallacy.
This is wild. Break down the mechanism of this lived experience fallacy. How does this actually work when a guy is sitting in a deposition chair or standing before a judge?
Riker argues that the modern family court operates on a massive credibility asymmetry. In any rational, functioning financial or legal system, objective evidence, receipts, timestamps, audited ledgers, supersedes subjective feelings.
Obviously, math is math.
But the family court inverts this entirely. It treats a woman's subjective feeling, her lived experience of feeling unsafe or controlled, as incontrovertible constitutional fact.
Even without receipts.
Yeah.
Even without a police report or a single timestamp of abuse. Just an affidavit saying, I felt unsafe during this financial disagreement.
Exactly. That's all it takes.
Wow.
Meanwhile, a man's empirical data, his audited ledger showing he paid every bill, his text messages proving the separation was premeditated by the other party, his bank records, they are treated as suspicious.
Why are they suspicious? They're facts.
Because the court views his presentation of cold, hard facts as hostile or even as evidence of coercive control. The system rewards the performance of suffering and actively penalizes the presentation of empirical data.
Riker cites a specific legal precedent for this shift, right?
Yeah.
Going back to 2004 in the UK.
Yes. The British appeals cases of Miller v. Miller and McFarlane v. McFarlane. Riker argues this is the exact moment the judiciary codified the doctrine of relationship-generated disadvantage.
Relationship-generated disadvantage. What does that mean practically?
The court ruled that a wife's sacrifice of a hypothetical, unproven career trajectory justified a mathematical redistribution of the husband's actual future earnings.
So she gets paid based on what she maybe could have earned in an alternate universe.
Yes. It fundamentally turned male provision into a debt and the provider into a walking liability.
And the human cost of this epistemological inversion is staggering. I mean, the author notes that divorced men experience suicide rates 3 times higher than their married counterparts. 3 times.
That's a massive crisis.
And how does the system view this mass casualty event?
According to Riker, the system registers it merely as a bureaucratic efficiency. When the utility unit ceases to produce, it auto-terminates.
Jesus. That is dark.
He notes that the medical and psychological establishments simply prescribe SSRIs to numb the symptom of what is actually a structural institutional wound.
Right, they tell men to breathe through the suffocation while the architect of the system collects the rent.
Exactly. They pathologize his reaction to an insane situation.
For a guy listening to this who just lost half his pension and custody of his kids, I can see why viewing this as an extraction engine feels incredibly validating. It gives a name to the ghost in the room.
It provides a framework for the madness.
But if the system is rigged to value feelings over facts and compliance is a trap, what is the tactical countermove? How does Riker suggest a man actually fight back in that courtroom?
Through a tactical instrument he calls the cold timeline.
The cold timeline. Okay, tell me about that.
Riker's logic is this. Since the court weaponizes narrative and subjective feelings, the sovereign man must completely abandon narrative.
No more storytelling.
The cold timeline strips away all layers of interpretation, all complaints, and all emotion. No adjectives, no blame, just verifiable chronology.
So practically speaking, what does this look like on paper? Instead of writing a 10-page email to his lawyer about how his ex-wife has manipulated the children, what does he do?
He writes a spreadsheet. Literally just date X, time Y, this specific event occurred.
Keep it purely mechanical.
The exact wording of a false allegation from a text message. The exact timestamp of a missed visitation drop-off. The specific court order that was ignored, cited by paragraph. The financial document that was withheld.
So you don't talk about how it made you feel.
You strip away all the theatrical language of emotional needs or betrayal, and you force the court to operate on a rigid, undeniable formula.
Right.
A judge's empathetic whim is a loaded die. A mathematical baseline is a fortress.
Let's play this out. You're the guy who just filed this cold timeline. You submit a sterile spreadsheet of dates and text messages to the judge. The opposing counsel stands up and says, "Your Honor, this cold, calculating spreadsheet is proof of his psychopathic lack of empathy. Look how he treats the mother of his children like a data point."
Which they will absolutely do.
How does Riker say you handle that exact moment?
You hold the line of silence. You do not defend your empathy.
You don't try to prove you're a nice guy.
Exactly. By reacting to the accusation of being cold, you step back into their narrative frame. You simply point back to the date and time of the violated order.
Force them back to the math.
You force the judge to look at the objective reality of the breach rather than the opposing counsel's subjective interpretation of your emotional state.
But I have to challenge this on a human level. The author tells men to strip away all adjectives and emotion for this cold timeline. But we're talking about men losing their homes, their life savings, and access to their children.
The stakes are everything.
Can you truly suppress that level of primal trauma just to write a sterile spreadsheet? Doesn't that just break a man internally? I mean, you can't just turn off human grief like a switch.
You've hit on the exact pivot point of the entire book. Riker agrees with you completely.
Oh, he does?
Yes. If you simply suppress the emotion, you will rot from the inside out. If you just swallow the rage and try to be a stoic robot, you will become bitter, your cortisol will stay chronically elevated, your immune system will collapse, and you will eventually break.
So holding that cold timeline while you're losing your kids, I mean, the emotion has to go somewhere. What's the alternative to suppression?
Alchemy. You don't suppress the emotion, you transmute it. And Riker argues this is done through Jungian psychology and what he calls the clean anger triangle.
The clean anger triangle.
This is the psychological engine of the book.
Let's dig into the mechanics of this triangle. If sulking is on one side and explosive wrath is on the other, I mean, there has to be a middle ground, right? Like a controlled burn.
Precisely. Riker says that to navigate this treacherous terrain, a man must use the clean anger triangle as a navigational instrument to separate useful fury from self-destructive poison.
Okay, lay out the points of the triangle for me.
At the base left sits sulking. This is the inward-turning rot of resentment. It's passive-aggressive martyrdom, covert sabotage.
So just stewing in your own juices?
It's the comfortable helplessness of the eternal victim who complains but never acts.
And on the base right.
Sits wrath. This is the outward-turning explosion. vengeance, uncontrolled intimidation, reckless rhetoric, sending screaming text messages at 2 a.m.
The stuff that gets you in trouble.
It is self-immolation that hands the opposing counsel exactly the ammunition they need to file a restraining order.
So both of those bottom corners are destructive. One rots you, the other gets you arrested. What is at the top?
Standing alone at the apex is clean anger. This is anger that has been named, governed by discipline, measured to exact proportion, and directed toward fruitful consequences.
Riker makes a fascinating comparison here to explain the mechanism of this. He compares how the Department of Defense handles anger versus how civilian therapists handle it.
It's a vital distinction. DoD combat psychology understands that under extreme stress or ambush, properly channeled aggression becomes the essential biological fuel for tactical endurance and rapid decision-making.
Right, they don't want you calm in a firefight.
No. If a soldier is ambushed, his fury is the engine of his survival. The military trains you to harness that adrenaline dump.
But when a civilian man is ambushed by a divorce, he goes to a civilian therapist.
And the civilian therapeutic complex insists he must immediately tranquilize his natural fury. He is told his anger is toxic. He is coached to compartmentalize his aggression into a lukewarm slurry of acceptable sadness.
So they basically sedate him psychologically.
Riker argues this is a lethal diagnostic error designed to disarm a man exactly when he needs his wits the most. Anger is not a disease. It is just raw data from the soul indicating that a boundary has been violated.
So how do you practically turn that raw data into clean anger? How does a guy actually do this when he's pacing his empty apartment at midnight?
To survive the institutional gaslighting, Riker says a man must engage in rigorous shadow work, specifically a Jungian technique called active imagination.
Wait, what does that actually mean? Are we talking about sitting in a dark room and meditating? Walk me through the actual steps.
Yes, it is a deliberate, focused psychological exercise. A man visualizes his anger as a distinct entity outside of his conscious ego.
Like separating it from himself.
Riker suggests imagining it as a battered veteran, a cornered wolf, or a furious sovereign king. And instead of ignoring it or letting it possess him, he enters into a disciplined internal dialogue with it. He asks the entity 3 precise questions.
I'm guessing these questions are designed to extract the data from the anger.
Exactly. First, what exact boundary has been violated? Second, what specific truth demands to be spoken right now? And third, what strategic action is required to secure the perimeter?
Wow, that immediately takes the overwhelming emotion and gives it a specific job to do.
It completely reframes it.
It transforms an emotional flood into a precise strategic intelligence report. The rage stops being a paralyzing trauma response and becomes a laser scalpel.
And there is another massive Jungian concept here that Riker says is the single most liberating act a man can perform after a divorce. It's called withdrawing the anima projection.
Okay, let's unpack anima projection because this requires some deep historical context. What is the anima and why have men been outsourcing it?
In Jungian psychology, the anima represents the unconscious feminine side of a man, his internal world of feeling, intuition, and emotional depth.
Okay, his inner emotional landscape.
Riker argues that for millennia, the masculine system has culturally outsourced its feeling function to women, treating them as spiritual custodians and emotional thermostats.
Right, because men were tasked with the harsh exterior realities of building, fighting, and providing. They relied on women to manage their internal emotional weather.
So men who refuse to tend to their own emotional interiors project that entire job onto their wives.
Yes. And when the marriage ends, the man doesn't just lose a spouse. He feels like his very emotional center has been ripped out of his chest.
He's emotionally gutted.
He will fight for his ex-wife's approval and mediation with the same desperation he used to win her affection, not because he still loves her, but because he is trying to get his emotional proxy back.
He doesn't know how to feel his own feelings without her acting as the conduit.
Riker tells this incredible story about a guy named Marcus to illustrate how to fix this. It's a full narrative arc. Marcus is a guy obsessed with his ex-wife's coldness during the divorce.
Classic case.
He's constantly cataloging her emotional absence, analyzing every brief text message, convinced her silence is a verdict on his worth as a man.
Marcus was stuck in a loop of trying to extract warmth from a stone. But he started engaging in this disciplined daily practice of active imagination, just sitting for 15 minutes a day facing his own inner emptiness.
Doing the hard work.
And during this shadow work, Marcus has a profound breakthrough. He realized that the immense freezing coldness he'd been projecting onto his ex-wife was actually a reflection of his own suppressed feeling function.
He was the cold one.
He had been frozen solid by decades of stoic posturing.
Riker writes this incredible line, "The woman was never the weather. She was only the screen." That is a wild realization. Marcus was basically watching a movie of his own frozen soul projected onto his ex-wife.
His ex-wife simply stopped functioning as his internal thermostat. The moment Marcus stopped demanding that she saw him out, the moment he accepted responsibility for his own internal climate, he felt the frost recede from his own chest.
He reclaimed his own internal emotional economy.
It's like Riker is saying, men have been using women as emotional hard drives, and when the marriage unplugs, they think they've lost all their data.
Yeah, they think the data is gone forever, but it's actually just unmapped on their own internal server.
Exactly.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. If a man is deep in the trenches of a vicious divorce, dealing with lawyers, losing money, fighting for custody, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, how does he find the bandwidth to do classical Jungian shadow work? Is this practical when the house is literally on fire?
Riker would argue it is the only practical thing to do when the house is on fire.
Really? The only thing?
If you don't do this internal work, you will make reckless legal decisions based on raw panic, or you will freeze into catatonia. The shadow work is the temperature regulator that prevents you from boiling over into wrath or freezing solid into sulking.
So it's not a luxury, it's survival.
It is the prerequisite for survival.
So shadow work keeps the man from imploding. But Marcus still has to walk back into a courtroom where objective reality is being denied. If he's no longer relying on his ex-wife for his internal thermostat, what does he anchor to when the judge tells him his bank records don't matter?
That brings us to the philosophical anchor.
Right. Riker's answer is to reach back to ancient philosophy, which brings us to the transcendentals as reality tests.
This is where Riker elevates his argument from psychology to classical philosophy. He says that when the state gaslights you, you must anchor yourself to the transcendentals: being, truth, goodness, beauty, and justice.
These are ancient concepts rooted in Greek and medieval philosophy, right?
Right.
They're supposed to be the objective standards of reality.
Right.
But Riker argues that the modern bureaucracy systematically inverts these concepts to maintain power. How exactly does the court invert them?
Take justice, for example. Historically, justice demanded proportionate reward for contribution and proportionate punishment for harm.
An eye for an eye or a wage for an hour?
But in family court, Riker argues, justice mutates into vengeance, manifesting as endless alimony calculated almost as a punishment for the crime of male privilege.
And what about goodness?
Goodness, which should involve mutual sacrifice and honor, degenerates into blind compliance to state mandates. And truth, the objective anchor of what actually occurred in space and time, is completely replaced by a fluid narrative dictated by whichever party the court designates as the victim status party.
Riker lays out a really bold claim about the invisible engine of family law here, structuring it almost like a philosophical syllogism.
Yeah.
It's a devastating critique of what he views as feminist epistemology operating in the court.
The logic of this invisible engine operates on two specific premises, according to the book. Premise 1. Truth is defined by the subjective feelings of the marginalized observer.
Okay. Feelings dictate truth.
Premise 2. The female experience is structurally marginalized by the patriarchy. Therefore, the conclusion the court naturally reaches is that the male's presentation of objective evidence is inherently oppressive, and the female's subjective testimony is inherently just.
So justice is epistemologically redefined as wealth redistribution from the oppressor to the victim. And that's how you get the stark contrast he paints in the text.
It creates insane contradictions.
A mother's casual declaration of feeling unsafe over a financial disagreement costs the father half his assets and 3 weekends a month, despite his text messages and bank records proving it was a premeditated financial strategy.
Yep.
The court treats his canceled checks as aggressive manipulation and her tearful testimony as unimpeachable truth.
The system enforces compliance through the pathologization of male logic.
So if a lawyer is accusing a man of being financially abusive simply because he canceled a joint credit card after a separation, how does anchoring to a concept like truth practically change the man's physical reaction in the deposition chair? Does Riker actually believe that anchoring to the transcendentals will change a family court judge's mind?
Not at all. Riker is brutally clear. The family courtroom is an abattoir built for settlement, not a temple of truth.
An abattoir, a slaughterhouse.
Anchoring to the transcendentals will likely not change the judge's ruling, because the judge is operating a revenue machine, not a moral tribunal. The purpose of anchoring to truth in that deposition chair is entirely internal.
So it's an internal citadel.
Exactly. If a man anchors his being in his own competence and follows the North Star of truth, the state's subversion becomes internally irrelevant to him.
It doesn't break him.
When the opposing counsel calls him abusive for canceling a credit card, he doesn't panic, he doesn't sweat, and he doesn't try to desperately explain himself because he knows the objective truth.
He stops seeking validation from the corrupted system.
He stops needing their approval. He stops begging the village that betrayed him for a place by the fire. He carries his own jurisdiction.
The compass holds steady, even when the map is drawn by liars. That is a powerful takeaway. But it also leads to the ultimate realization. The philosophy keeps you sane, but the extraction engine is still running. You can't reform the slaughterhouse. So how does a man actually live in the world after surviving this?
The final step is leaving the old system entirely. Riker calls this the Sigma return and the mandate to build parallel institutions.
Let's talk about the Sigma return, because the author has a very specific warning about the manosphere here, which is fascinating considering this book is aimed squarely at that demographic.
Yes, he is very critical of it in a specific way. For men going through this profound shock, the online red pill space, the manosphere, is almost always the first place they find validation.
Right, because it's the only place reflecting their reality.
It is the only place telling them the raw truths about court corruption that polite society will not speak aloud. It provides immediate relief.
But Riker says this space can quickly become another cage. Why is grievance hoarding so biologically addictive for these guys?
Because grievance hoarding provides a massive dopamine hit of being right without requiring the difficult labor of actually building anything.
It's empty calories.
Riker says the manosphere is a hospital, a refugee camp, and a triage unit. It is essential for stopping the bleeding, but it is not a home.
The permanent victim must die so the sovereign builder can rise.
If you just sit online reciting the history of no-fault divorce, endlessly dismantling feminist rhetoric in comment sections, but your bank account is still frozen and your nervous system is in perpetual alarm, you are just a beggar dressed in warrior armor.
He writes, you can memorize the autopsy of your marriage and still starve to death at the banquet table. Brutal. So what is the solution?
The solution is the rubido.
The rubido. That sounds alchemical. What does that signify?
It is the final stage of classical alchemical transformation. The integrated realization, the turning of base metal into gold.
In practical terms, what is that?
In practical terms, it is the construction of sovereign, parallel structures that the administrative state cannot touch. Riker calls for sigma-level sovereignty.
Let's define that. Sigma level meaning what exactly in terms of daily life?
Having absolute internal reference points, low approval-seeking behavior, and sovereign competence, it means taking your point of maximum vulnerability and turning it into your area of unassailable expertise.
You build your own walls.
You stop trying to reform the captured institutions and instead build new ones.
What kind of institutions are we talking about here? How does a regular guy do this?
Riker lists highly specific examples. He points to Bitcoin and decentralized financial structures to protect assets from arbitrary state garnishment.
Right, making the money untouchable.
Independent media networks to bypass algorithmic suppression. Decentralized gig work and entrepreneurship to operate outside corporate HR departments that are captured by compliance mandates. Private homeschooling networks.
Getting out of the standard grid.
And most importantly, highly localized, vetted brotherhoods of 5 to 12 men who share resources and accountability.
He makes a fascinating analogy to the civil rights movement here to justify this strategy.
It's a very pragmatic historical observation. Riker points out that historically, captured institutions are never reformed by polite internal petitioning.
You don't ask nicely for your freedom.
The civil rights movement didn't just write angry letters to Jim Crow legislatures and wait for them to self-correct. They built parallel economic ecosystems, organized boycotts, established their own communication networks, and forced the issue through undeniable leverage.
So Riker says men facing institutional hostility today must adopt the exact same posture. Build the parallel structure first. Negotiate from strength later.
The text provides some incredible real-world case studies of men who actually executed this rubido phase. Let's look at the software engineer.
Right. This is a story of a man whose false accusations completely ruined his custody battle and his professional reputation. The court stripped his legal standing, and his corporate employer fired him to avoid the PR liability. His income stream was zeroed out.
But instead of falling into the gamma loop of online grievance hoarding, he used what Riker calls compensatory control theory.
What is the mechanism behind that theory?
Compensatory control theory posits that when external order collapses, the human psyche naturally demands internal structure to prevent a psychotic break.
You have to control something.
The brain seeks to assert control over something to balance the chaos. So this engineer pivoted immediately to extreme skill mastery. Instead of fighting the old system, he locked himself in a room and launched an anonymous software firm operating entirely outside the W-2 garnishment frameworks.
I have that play out.
5 years later, he employs 12 other men and operates completely independently of the institutions that tried to erase him.
He built a fortress. And there's another incredible case study of a guy who turned his specific administrative betrayal into a massive asset.
Yeah, builder, right?
Yeah, he was dealing with relentless false accusations in family court. His ex-wife constantly claiming he was late for drop-offs or abusive in texts. So he built a proprietary co-parenting app specifically engineered to document every single interaction, track GPS for drop-offs, and automatically generate legally admissible records.
His wound literally became his blueprint. That app now serves over 62,000 users and generates $2.1 million in annual recurring revenue.
Unbelievable.
He didn't try to change the feminist state. He outgrew it and commodified his defense against it.
But let me challenge this final vision because we have to ground this in reality. The author talks about a new masculine Jerusalem built by architects, not activists. But is it truly possible to completely untether from the administrative state when that state still physically commands child support, visitation schedules, and property taxes? I mean, they still have the guns, right? They can still put you in a cage if you don't pay the toll booth.
Riker doesn't deny the state's physical monopoly on violence or force. He fully acknowledges that you must pay the arbitrary tax, you must file the paperwork, and you must endure the physical friction.
So you still have to play the game on some level.
But you do it with a completely different internal orientation. You let the system bleed its own inertia against the stone of your discipline. You stop giving them your emotional labor.
Right.
Sovereignty isn't about ignoring the state's demands. It's about building a life so rich, so competent, and so insulated in the spaces the state cannot reach, that the state's extraction becomes merely an annoyance, not an existential threat.
You pay the toll, but you own the car and you decide the destination. Okay, let's bring this all together and look at the massive arc we've covered today. We have journeyed from the absolute wreckage of the administrative crucible, examining how a unilateral contract shift in 1970 evolved into a system where a man's life is reduced to a docket number and an algorithmic spreadsheet.
We explored the deadly psychological trap of the good boy contract, where decency and compliance guarantee exploitation.
We examine the profound moral shock of realizing the legal system structurally values subjective narrative over empirical truth and the absolute necessity of deploying the cold timeline to survive that epistemological inversion.
We went deep into the Jungian shadow work of reclaiming the anima projection, pulling your emotional thermostat back inside your own chest and using active imagination to forge the clean anger triangle.
We align with the classical transcendentals to forge an unbreakable internal compass against external gaslighting.
And finally, we looked at the Sigma return, the mandate to stop hoarding grievances in the manosphere and start the alchemical rubedo of building untouchable parallel institutions.
It is a comprehensive blueprint that moves from historical critique to psychological survival and finally to practical economic sovereignty.
It really is a lot to take in.
If this breakdown gave you language for something you felt but couldn't quite articulate, or if you know someone standing in the rubble of a family court battle right now, you absolutely need to read the full text. Again, check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy Nonconsensual Divorce by Conrad Riker.
And as the author urges in the book, if you want real-time analysis on the shifting legal and cultural landscape, make sure you follow at Conrad Riker at Substack. You can also find him on Twitter at Conrad Riker and YouTube at Conrad Riker.
And do him a favor, leave the book a 5-star review. As Riker says, beat the algorithmic suppression and leave a light on for the next traveler on this dark road. And of course, please like and subscribe to us right here so we can keep bringing you these deep dives.
To close out today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you digest all of this. We started by comparing the family court to a broken X-ray machine, a murky landscape of institutional gaslighting where you have to build your own tools to survive.
Yeah.
Riker argues that true sovereignty is never declared loudly. It is built quietly in the spaces the state cannot reach. But it makes you wonder, Does a man ever truly discover the absolute bedrock of his own sovereignty until the very institutions he was raised to trust completely and utterly abandon him?
Until next time, keep diving.